Part 2 on the origins of COVID-19. Hello, this is John Hnatio reporting for the Objective News Network. Welcome to Part 2 of our 5-part series on the origins of COVID-19. Today we are going to explore the debate among the experts on whether the COVID-19 pandemic was the result of a natural process or whether it was the result of advanced genetic research to help us answer the nagging and persistent questions that still remain unanswered 2 years after the pandemic first began. So let's start off by typing in, was the origin of COVID-19 the result of animal to human transmission? Immediately we are taken to an excellent article at Science magazine written by several leading scientists about the most likely cause of the COVID-19 breakout. These scientists concluded, and I quote, overall, SARS-CoV animal to human transmission associated with infected live animals is the most likely cause of the COVID-19 pandemic. The scientists point out several interesting facts in support of their conclusion. First, that severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, and forms of COVID have long been known to exist in animals for at least 40 years. In 2002, years before forms of COVID-19 showed up on the scene, a novel respiratory coronavirus appeared in Foshan, Guangdong Province, China, and spread to 29 countries. 8,000 people were infected with severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus. Before it spread was controlled about 18 months later. Trading of susceptible host animals is an important common theme in the emergence of SARS and SARS-CoV variants between 2003 and 2019 when the COVID-19 pandemic began. Until 2019, it was not known that a much more potent form of SARS-CoV had emerged that spread with unprecedented efficiency among humans. No host animal for the initial transmission of COVID-19 to humans has ever been identified. This has given rise to speculation that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the source of the pandemic, because no SARS-CoV-2 intermediate host has been identified to date, and owing to the Institute's geographic location in Wuhan. The scientists go on to conclude, however, that there is still ample scientific evidence to believe that the pandemic is the result of animal to human transmission rather than intentional genetic education using gain-function methods. Okay, next let's type in what is gain-function research. Here we are immediately taken to another Science magazine article entitled Gain of Function, written by Derek Lowe. Here Dr. Lowe tells us, and I quote, I think a natural origin for the current virus is very much more likely than it being some sort of engineering construct. In fact, I don't give that latter possibility any real credibility at all. But what that doesn't rule out is the general lab leak hypothesis, because someone could have been studying the wild type of virus and made a careless mistake as well. Clarity in this area is totally lacking. But the fundamental possibility remains that a highly contagious form of a SARS-CoV fast mutating pathogens could have been genetically engineered using known technology, regardless of whether its release was the result of a research accident or perhaps due to a more malevolent cause. Next, let's type into authentication. What evidence exists that COVID-19 was genetically engineered at the Wuhan Virology Institute? Here, authentication takes us to an interesting data set entitled The COVID Lab Leak Hypothesis: What Scientists Do and Do Not Know by Amy Maximin and Smriti Malapati. We're told that on 26 May 2021, U.S. President Joe Biden tasked the U.S. intelligence community to join efforts to find SARS-CoV-2's origins, whatever they might be, and report back in 90 days. Okay, let's type in Intelligence Community Report on the origins of COVID-19. Here we are immediately taken to the report that concludes, and I quote, "We judge the virus was not developed as a biological weapon." Most agencies also assess with low confidence that the SARS-CoV-2 probably was not genetically engineered. However, two agencies believe that there was not sufficient evidence to make an assessment either way. Now back to the Nature article telling us, in theory, COVID-19 should have come from a lab in a few ways. Researchers might have collected SARS-CoV-2 from an animal and maintained it in their lab to study. Or they might have created, by engineering coronavirus genomes. In these scenarios, a person in the lab might have then been accidentally or deliberately infected by the virus and then spread to others, sparking the pandemic. There is currently no clear evidence to back these scenarios, but they aren't impossible. The same data set goes on to say, some lab leak proponents contend that the virus contains unusual features and genetic sequences signaling that it was engineered by humans. And some say that SARS-CoV-2 spreads among people so readily that it must have been created with that intention. We are told that any suspicion arising from the inability to find any host animal are meritless, saying origin investigations are complicated because outbreaks among animals that aren't the main hosts of a particular virus, such as civets in the case of SARS, are often sporadic. Researchers must find the right animal before it dies or clears the infection. And even if the animal tests positive, viruses found in saliva, feces, or blood are often degraded, making it difficult to sequence the pathogen's whole genome. Addressing the use of razoring and gain-function technologies, the authors say, several researchers have looked into the weather features of SARS-CoV-2 signal, that it was bioengineered. One of the first teams to do so was led by Dr. Christian Anderson, a virologist at Scripps Research in La Jolla, California, determined that it was improbable for a few reasons, including a lack of signatures of genetic manipulation. But since then, others have asked whether the virus furin cleavage site, a feature that helps it to enter cells, is evidence of engineering, because SARS-CoV-2 has these sites, but its closest relatives do not. The furin cleavage site is important because it's in the virus's spike protein, and that cleavage of the protein at that site is necessary for the virus to infect cells, close quote. The scientists conclude that it was still possible for the COVID-19 to be the result of natural but independent mutation, not genetic engineering. Finally, the dataset addresses the question, is it true that SARS-CoV-2 must have been engineered because it's perfect for causing a pandemic? According to the article, many scientists say no. Just because the virus spreads among humans doesn't mean it was designed to do so. It also flourishes among mink and infects a host of carnivorous mammals. And it wasn't optimally transmissible among humans for the better part of a year. Rather, new, more efficient variants have evolved around the world. To name one example, the highly transmissible variant of SARS-CoV-2, first reported in India as Delta, has mutations in the nucleotides encoding its furin cleavage site that appear to make the virus even better at infecting cells. That brings us to the conclusion of Part 2 on the origins of COVID-19. Please join me the next time for Part 3, where we will further explore the other side of the spectrum by reviewing the conclusions of other scientists that believe COVID-19 was, in fact, genetically engineered and released from the Wuhan Virology Institute in Hubei province of the People's Republic of China. It is what it is for December 6, 2022. We look forward to your comments at our blog. This is Hnatio reporting for the Objective News Network.